reread it.
Yeah, so you've read the book before, but not recently. Welcome to the Way of Zen by Helen Watts. So we're gonna go get started. Here you go. This is the beginning of the book. If you're observing my screen share, whether it's in Discord or in the little video thing.
What if I'm not observing your screen share, Des? Do I get kicked out?
No.
Oh, dang.
There are not a lot of rules in book club, really.
The first rule of book club. We're a book club. That's about the only rule.
We're a book club, and we tend to talk about the book in some form or fashion. Even if all you've done is observe the book physically and be like,
I know this is a book.
This is in fact a book, and then we could talk about the nature of things in books. That's a
book nature. Yes.
Yeah. The preface doesn't it's not. It's worth a read, but it's also not like I don't think you have to read it to get to the first part of the book.
The face before the face. That's very Zen, don't you think?
No, I thought it was like I just love his writing because he sounds like somebody who has everything like sorted in his head really nicely. And he basically talks about what are the issues of even writing a book like this. And those are kind of the similar issues like what we have when we try to talk about Zen and stuff like that with each other.
Right.
So that was like the one bit of value I got out of that.
Yeah, he absolutely addresses that issue of like this book about Eastern culture being written by a Westerner. So I do. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that as well, Bala.
But Des, you skipped about the Chinese pronunciation guide.
Ah, yes.
This is important. No. Go back to it. This is really important. He writes J instead of R.
Mm-hmm.
So if you miss that, you're gonna make a total fool of yourself when you try to pronounce this stuff. This one really like threw me. I have never seen this before.
I assume this is like pinyin or something, and it's like notoriously like is nothing like you would pronounce it like in English or something.
So there's also something to consider at any time somebody's talking about the pronunciation of Chinese is that Chinese actually has 25 different like sub-languages to it.
Yeah.
And dialects, and so like there's a lot.
You can speak Chinese to another Chinese person, and they could not understand you. But if you both write it out, you'll be understood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Japanese will understand too, almost.
Because speaking to some individuals from China, I was talking to them about the language, and they were like, it's better to think of it as a family of languages than, like, there's one solid, this is Chinese. Because I think Mandarin is distinct from other dialects and sub-bits of other types of Chinese. So anyway, so I say that to say that I look at this, and I would assume that maybe this is influenced by a dialect. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that the pronunciation is generally like secondary to like the characters in a way in Chinese. Like it becomes almost like an information conveying language for writing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true, because when you pronounce something, you lose so much information, right? Because there's like 50 characters that are all pronounced like woo or something, right?
Right, just like French.
Dogs, you're in the way.
Yeah, I know. Like it's like the Shobo Genzo is like 2,000 pages in English, but I think that in Japanese it's like 500 pages or something crazy.
Yeah,
so I'm not sure.
Yeah, so keep talking.
All right. Sorry for the railing stuff.
No, it's fine. All right, part one. Part one of this book is about the philosophy of the Tao. So it's very interesting.
I like the Tao.
I don't. I figured out why. Like,
okay.
We don't have to get into that. That was good.
Now we have to fight Mbala.
I would like to talk a little bit about the Tao before we just jump in on like, well, why don't you like it? For those who are like maybe listening to this recording later, that way there's more context to be had in the conversation.
I don't even want to know. I just have to fight Mbala now.
No, I want to know. I'm curious.
No. I can't fight you all, guys. You're too much. I'll probably just start liking it. It's fine. It's fine.
I'll just give in to peer pressure and it'll be fine.
Let me just force you to change your beliefs. It's fine.
You don't have to like it. It's fine to dislike things.
What's that, Sal?
It's fine to dislike things. I think it's important to recognize why you dislike things, so it's not just this mindless, like, I hate that because I hate that.
Oh, like Green Day? Ooh, I hate Green Day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just like your dislike of Green Day, Max.
Yeah, it's just like Green Day.
You like Green Day?
I am indifferent towards
Cell
Green Day.
doesn't talk until Green Day gets smashed.
Right.
I was talking before this.
Were you?
You said something. I heard your voice. I just don't know what it said.
I was asking the difference between cow and Dow.
Mm.
Tao and Dao. Dao is the way you pronounce it. Tao is the way it was translated into English.
Spelled for some reason.
Yeah, but it's pronounced Dao.
But they're the same
And
thing. They're the same
it's
word,
exact
even.
Same thing.
They just don't.
Yeah.
Part of why
Oh,
I think
I
that's
was-
hilarious, though, is because the Dao that is spoken is not the Dao. So if you call it the Tao, maybe you're closer. I don't know.
Clever.
Man, that's a
Here's
whole
the
thing.
Yeah.
I thought Mambala was saying that he didn't like Tao as a religion, but like Tao as a religion. I was like, what's the difference?
Yeah, fuck
There-
Taoism.
there is
but
no
Taoism
difference.
is great.
Sorry. I will say Tao a lot because that's how you pronounce it in Czech, and it just
That's
slips in my
fine.
speech a lot. Yeah.
At no point will I be offended if you pronounce something wrong. I think we've all learned how bad I am at pronouncing things.
I will, however, excommunicate you, as is my priority.
Mm-hmm. I like the sense of attachment you have to the pronunciation. Have you considered looking at that and letting it go?
Who are we talking to? There's no one here to talk to. What are you talking about? There's just noises happening.
All right, so it starts out talking about the essential thoughts around the anyway. It's not religion or philosophy. It's not psychology or type of science. And so I often lean towards these ways of thinking myself. So it's really fascinating to reread this sort of literature for myself. Because I abandoned a lot of the verbiage a long time ago, but it still represents a lot of the ways I think. So, just a heads up, I have a bias in favor of a lot of these ways of thinking. So that will probably color some of my discussion.
I am without bias or blemish.
But also, once again, I have zero feelings on if you like it or not.
I will judge you for your feelings.
So it's this it's really interesting, and I like it best where Alan says, as a sculptor reveals an image by the act of removing pieces of stone from a block. I think in conversation, this is where I tell people, going back to how it's not a religion or a philosophy, it's a practice, right? It's an action. And this really, as an artist, I think heavily about this revealing of the image and the act, and you have to actively be sculpting to sculpt something, right? It doesn't just do it on its own. It doesn't reveal itself.
What if it did though? What if sculptures just happened out of a tree sometimes?
Wild. So I'm curious.
It's funny that you read the action into this because this is something I completely missed in that sentence.
Really?
That's pretty cool. No, but I understood it as it's the negation, right? Like you say what it isn't instead of what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if a second you say what it is, it's not that. So
Right. And so that frustrates people a lot, right? Like, why don't you just say what it is? Damn it, right? And so to calm them down, you can tell them this beautiful thing about how sculpture reveals a sculpture, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a very nice way of putting that. That's very positive.
Yeah.
Considering the rest of it is totally negative.
That can be absolutely a really frustrating way. And I think Alan touches on this a little later in part 1 of the super frustration that comes into the way Zen practitioners tend to talk about Zen and
the way Zen do.
The way Zen does. I don't know. I'd be curious to like super pick apart a more.
Well, he seems pretty happy to call it like a way of liberation. So, like, I think that's kind of weird that he's like, well, it's not a religion, it's not philosophy, it's not psychology, it's not science, but it is a way of liberation. Like, that's the one thing somehow. But what if we understand the way of liberation in terms of those other things, which I think is reasonable to do as well. So,
this can help you decouple the two.
Yeah.
Decouple to the two what?
Way of liberation versus, you know, religion or psychology or any of those things. Because you can have a path that's a way of liberation where you literally just look at a blade of grass every day.
Yeah.
That's not a religion. That's not anything. That's just looking at grass.
But like beyond any concept, basically.
Right. Well, and then
way of liberation. Way of liberation has to be everything, right? It would be philosophy, religion, psychology, like every aspect of your life. No,
it can be anything.
Yeah, I think it would.
Go ahead.
Yeah, because like, I mean, it has to contain all of reality, I think, to be meaningful.
Yeah, you don't get half liberated, right?
It would be every possible action that you could do. Like if a enlightened being was just like doing philosophy, then it would be way of liberation philosophy. At least that's what I was kind of a bit confused about by that part.
Well, I mean, in that respect, then, Zen is simply a way of liberation without that last part on it, except we call it Zen. So it's a Zen way of liberation, I suppose. But calling it Zen seems a little too heavy-handed, even though it is Zen.
Yeah.
Look, Des, we're not even letting you get started.
No, it's okay. No, this is what book club's about. I really like the discussion. It's awesome. I was just trying to think of how to transition to any part of the chapter. Because it just feels really like, and here's a tangent. I like this thing where
do it now.
Words. So, and I think about this a lot when we're talking to people at different. When you talk to somebody either at any kind of different level of practice of you, right? Like whether you feel like they're higher or lower or better or worse or whatever. The words you use can communicate only between you as efficiently and as usefully as you have had similar experiences with the use of those words, right? And so, Alan Watts talks a little about this and around this quite a bit, I think, of how that can be really limiting. And so this Taoist approach to things can liberate you from those mechanisms which prevent clear communication, almost with a dumbing down of your mind and the way you think about things, right? So, anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of like what you've got at the highlighted at the top left, I guess, is it's like the words we just have to use words. It's kind of like a shame, but we have to use words.
Yeah, and that seems to be a crux of, or a part. I think I misused the word crux. I have no idea.
Horcrux.
Horcrux. The Horcrux that keeps Alan Watts alive is, in fact, Taoism.
Language. Yeah,
it's language. By its evil necessity. Anyway. Right. So yeah, you know, as children, as he says, we're taught to accept that this word means this thing and this thing exists and within these confines as long as it meets these parameters, and it's a lot of layering of thought that can really muck up the ability to let go of those things as well. This sentence here of like, what happens to my fist when I open my hand? Like,
it's a great line.
Which is such a good example.
Where does my lap go when I stand up?
Yeah, right?
Wow, I would usually think these are koans. It just means that language is badly designed.
Yep.
Yep. And I think ultimately that's often what I hope the well-meaning Zen practitioner who looks at you and says nonsense is effectively saying there's no real words to say what I want to say or could say about this thing.
Oh yeah.
So I'm just going to say some gibberish and it's as good as trying to explain to you.
And that's not true.
I think
I can be saying. So if I was super turbo wise, right, I would just like utter complete sequences of gibberish, and that will just reconfigure your brain upon hearing that, so that you will reach enlightenment. I think that would be possible.
I don't know. If that were possible, then there would be something written down that does that.
It wouldn't, because it depends on the person who hears that, so it's personal, and it also assumes you're like insanely turbo wise, which most people are not.
Well, this is like the flower sermon, right?
Exactly.
That started the Zen lineage. It's just that Buddha held up like a flower, and then like the person in the audience was just like awakened.
Single person got it, just one.
And then like obviously there's other people who got enlightened by like pebbles like bouncing off walls and stuff, just like the sound.
Right. So if you can do this through flowers and pebbles, you can do it through words.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's like the more conventional way that it happens, yeah. But it's kind of like random, I think. Like no one knows what's gonna make it happen for like each particular person.
Yeah, you have to sort of like get a feel for where this person gets it and where they don't, and then you have to find some clever way to sort of like from in secret explain it to them, have them figure it out, and basically feel like they figured it out themselves.
Right.
That's the aha. And then they can connect the dots with everything else once that last link is connected.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
So then he talks about the frustrations of being defined by things we have done or are doing in the moment, and that this sense of like, oh my god, why does it feel like the things I have done are a more real me than the me that is now? Because the now is so intangible and fleeting. And I find that such a fascinating thing to really just kind of reflect on.
How your past seems to be more real than you are.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, this makes it sound like, oh, us, the Western civilization, we do all these things and whatever. I mean, I don't know much about Confucianism, but I think that was, like, even worse. Right? Wasn't it?
What would you mean worse? What, like it was like shit, like it was just like a bad kind of philosophy, or like worse than capitalism kind of thing?
Huh?
Like,
what do you mean by worse?
You mean like it was like a living condition kind of thing, or?
No. My understanding of Confucianism is that it was extremely rigid, strict, formal. Like it had like all these things one had to do to participate in society. Basically, kind of
like
what we have here. What? Sorry.
A lot of social rituals.
And it was just like you think we are like forming people too much and whatever, but they've done it way more. And yet, out of that environment, you got Zen and all these other practices.
Well, I think that it's kind of just true in every society, or like just like what they call like ordinary beings or whatever in general, like in any society. So it's like it was true in India, it was true in China, it's true in Japan, true in Korea. Like I don't think that it's like it's only if you drop off that attachment to past and future, or like what my identity is and stuff like that. Like I don't think it's like an East versus West point generally.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And also, just to step in a little bit in favor of Confucianism, it clarified a lot of social interactions, so that people like me with autism can know what to say in certain circumstances, rather than having to like figure it out in the moment and hope you're not inappropriate. Like they just spell it out. Here's what you do. Here's when you do it.
Yeah.
And that was sort of a social lubricant so that everyone knew what was going on, how to save face, how to get along. But it does obviously have its drawbacks, and that's why the Tao comes in and says, hey, all of this artifice you're dealing with, all of these rituals and gestures and whatever, it's all empty. Like, this is nothing. You're totally deviating from just the natural flow of things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, on its own, Taoism is just can't work. On its own, Confucianism just can't work. You need both of them to sort of like keep an eye on each other. Moment from 10 years ago.
So he goes on even longer about like how language even forms the way we think about stuff and causes us often to think in a linear way when that's really puts a unnecessary boundary on some things. And so I highlighted this bit which says life itself does not proceed in this cumbersome linear fashion, and our own organisms could hardly live for a moment if they had to control themselves by taking thought of every breath, every beat of the heart, and every neural impulse. And
yeah, I was thinking that, like, let's say art would be two-dimensional, so maybe that's the way how to figure stuff out. But even then, you still read it like linearly, right? The way you look at pictures is still linear.
Mm-hmm.
You could change how you look at a picture, though.
Mm-hmm.
You just kind of like jump around, right? But it's like a linear sequence, sort of.
Well, I don't know. Like, I think there's like times when you can kind of perceive a piece of art like in a universal sense, like it just kind of permeates your body and mind. Like, it's not a very common experience, but I do think of times where it's like if I've been to an art gallery, just walk like coming up to the piece and you just kind of like feel that it's there with you in a way. It doesn't feel like a linear consideration of the piece.
Even to like get on a more concrete thought path, with artwork, depending on like your capabilities of your mind and your like stage of like, I think it's called anaphasia, your ability to really hold images in your mind. Like I look at a piece, and even though it was created in 2D, I see it much more differently. Perhaps because I my fellow artists will hopefully understand what I'm talking about. I see it in many layers as well, like a going backwards into the piece as well as a just the forward presentation. Um, like an oil painting has many layers to it. There was a beginning, and there's like layers on top of layers and blending, and so like the piece itself isn't just that moment where it's as you see it, but it's mini brush
As it
strokes
became.
and as it became, and I can like, I don't know, I can turn it around in my mind and see below the surface a little bit, and I don't know if that makes sense, but I think even to see a 2D piece of art has the ability to show you how to look beyond the linear of that moment.
The unfortunate issue with language is that we are restricted to it linearly because of time.
Mm-hmm.
And we also can't say multiple words in the same word.
Yeah.
So, like art, you could take in sort of in a holistic perspective. You can look at individual bits and see how they relate. You can look at like you were saying, how the artist themselves made the piece. Whereas if you just hear someone say, I drive a car, that's about as deep as it goes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was wondering if maybe the mandalas are like an attempt to kind of overcome that, but I know nothing about them. I can't really speak to that.
Mandalas actually are a little bit more about impermanence. So you spend all this effort making this beautiful piece of art, and then you destroy it and you feel no regret.
Okay.
Well, so you have to remember, like traditionally, a mandala is not like a painted image. It's not something that you put in on the wall. It's not the wallpaper you put on your
right?
computer. It's sand. Yeah, they use a colored sand. And they put it on the ground or on a board or whatever, and then they destroy it.
I have seen like the Thankas with them, like permanent depictions.
Oh yeah, but that's
And my understanding was that it's like a two-dimensional way of encoding, let's say, an entire sutra or something.
Can
That
be.
you just look at it and like all the symbolism and everything is like present all at once, like laid out.
I think it's also like resin casting a sandwich. Like
What?
so you can
Trying to capture an ocean in a bucket.
Yeah. Like so resin cast like clear resin casting a sandwich means I can forever look at upon the sandwich, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, but you can't eat it.
But you can't eat it, right? And so in that same way when we see these permanent depictions of mandalas, we can't eat it.
Don't eat the mandalas, Des.
Do you know what I mean though? Like
Yeah, I know. You're not making it and then you're not destroying it, so you miss the point.
you missed the point a
of
little bit.
impermanence. Yeah. Okay. That derailed. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay,
That's
Sel.
what
I
this
see.
whole thing is about.
No apologies. So one of our members in chat is using text rather than chatting in voice, so I may respond to them occasionally. I have that chat pulled up on a monitor. So yeah.
I'm walking around without a screen in front of me, so this is a good thing to be informed of.
Yeah, Sel says they're cleaning the kitchen right now. But also talking about the pictures and also taking a hammer and destroying a canvas sounded fascinating. I don't know that I would use a hammer as my tool of choice to destroy a canvas. I would probably like set it on fire.
Set the hammer on fire. Very good.
Ooh, fire hammer. Yeah. It's like the best of both worlds then.
There you go.
Hey, this is actually a good question. You can open two windows in Discord, like the Discord app.
I'm not
It
using
depends on your device.
a phone. I'm on my computer, and because I'm a fancy person who has invested oddly in my life, I have 3 monitors.
Oh, you lucky bitch.
And
Right,
so on
right.
one screen is where I have the book pulled up. On one screen is where I have Discord, and the other screen is where I'm controlling my recording and audio software to. Like...
Yeah, okay. I'm on a Mac. I was just wondering if there's a way how I can do the same thing.
So are you having?
I figured
Yeah,
it
you can
out.
pop out
Oh
the
my God.
if you're talking. Oh, you found the pop out feature.
Yes, I just did.
Okay, perfect.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's okay if you're not like. So I like to call myself a Discord native. I live here. I'm here all the time. I'm not like this particular server all the time, but like on servers all the time. So I speak the language.
That is cool.
Yeah. So yeah. No judgment if you just learn new things. It's good. It's good.
Tell us more about Zen, Des.
Yep. So I liked this example of considering the ease of showing someone how to tie their shoes versus telling them how to do it with words alone.
Oh yeah, words are
And,
awful for describing things.
I think this ties back to how we were talking about the like really awkward koans of Zen, and how it probably feels like trying to teach someone how to tie their shoes when they ask questions and stuff, right? And this is where we go back to my brain immediately wants to tie in this conversation I've had with like Techie a lot about skillful means and when approaching things, and you have to make a decision. I think some Zen masters might come across as like, dude, why are you talking to me like that? And you have to make these decisions of skillful means, right? Like, you also, anyway, there's a lot of factors to consider, but mostly you make your decisions, and hopefully it's skillful. There you go. I babbled a little, but there you are.
Good summary. You inadvertently proved Alan's point that words are useless.
I know. Thank you. That's how good I am at Zen.
Look at you.
I'm level 34.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a big level for Zen.
Yep, thank you. Skipping had just a touch. I really liked how he was talking about how Confucianism feels more like it's oriented towards a younger person, like you said. Max
Yes.
giving them direction on how to maneuver this society and all of its many rules and rituals, while Taoism is almost the religion.
That's the old man's way.
It's the old man's way, right? And so he referred to it as their retirement from society.
There's a lot of not carryover, but synchronicity in terms of this versus, say, the Hindu life cycle is not the right way to put it, but like stages.
Mm-hmm.
So, you've got you're a child, and then you grow up and you become a householder. So you take over your father's business or whatever it is. And then the third stage is you become a renunciate. You pass on your things to your children or whomever, and then you go into the forest and become a forest wanderer, and then eventually you figure out, the point of life and everything because you're just in the forest going crazy. And then you hit the fourth stage, which is like a realized being. And this is kind of a similar thing to the whole, you're a child and then you're a Confucian, and then you go sit on a rock for a bit and play the samisen, and then you become an enlightened Taoist.
Yeah. Confucianism presides then over the socially necessary task of forcing the original spontaneity of life into the rigid rules of convention, is how he puts it.
Good words. Good words.
And then he says that Taoism takes all these things and it says it's able to use it as an instrument instead of being used by it. And that's the liberation in many ways. And then then Alan Watts talks a little bit about the rebellion against God from the Western Christian. And
all right, yeah, throw that in there.
And I was like, all right, here we go. Weird tangent, Alan, but all right.
That one was quite difficult. Like, yeah, that threw me off.
Yeah.
I think like Christianity is just so like absolutely huge that it just has to be addressed in a way. Like if it wasn't, then people would be like, "What? How does this relate to Christianity?" So
right, this is definitely Alan writing to his audience, because not only does he know that mostly Westerners are going to be reading his book, but also he came up in a Christian life and was like ready to be ordained and stuff, and then he realized, oh wait, this is silly.
Yeah.
And then so like he's trying to give context, I think, for what's going on with that. But I think also his book may presume you know who he is.
A little bit, yeah. I would believe that with him. Hi, I'm Alan Watts. You already know who I am. Let's get going.
Right.
And then he gets into some defining of little pick aparts of vocabulary used when talking about stuff. The difference of, I believe, the way that the Judaic religions talk about the absolute versus how he proposes somebody kind of pursuing Taoism might consider the phrasing. And then he goes on about these words, like what I think might be pronounced Sujan or Natura Naturans versus Natura Naturata, which I had to think about a little bit because I was like, what the heck are these words?
This is really confusing. I mean, it's beautiful to read, but I'm like, couldn't you say it differently? But oh well.
It's a complex. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot, Alan. Thanks.
Thanks, Alan. That's a lot.
Not that it's not worth talking about. It's just it's difficult to talk about in some ways. It's almost a like I just need to stare at this paragraph for 30 minutes kind of like.
Well, the problem is this is basically a pun in Latin.
Mm-hmm.
Have fun.
All right, and then I'm gonna go to the next page. We know how to do because we just do. Oh yes. So then we're talking about knowing how to do things and like, well, how do I pursue these thoughts? How do I do these things? And we don't like. We know it in the same way that we know how to breathe and we know how to, you know, do things like fire our neurons. We just do it.
Do it.
Just do it.
Yeah.
Distinction. It's he states that Taoism is just an extension of this kind of knowledge, this innate natural knowledge, which I find interesting. I don't know. It's always interesting. And then suddenly we're talking about the I Ching, the I Ching. I don't remember how to pronounce it.
I mean, whatever.
He says ostensibly a book of divination, but ultimately more like a Rorschach test.
Those aren't entirely dissimilar, though.
No, it's not. But it was just really interesting to see it put that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I found that comparison very, very clarifying in some ways.
I think at the time, like the Rorschach test was like pretty heralded as well. I know that they used it for all of the people in the Nuremberg trials to like determine whether or not they were like criminally insane or something. Because they were like, oh, you must be insane to be a Nazi or something. So, but it didn't actually find them insane, and then they started thinking, oh, maybe it's not a very good test. But I don't know if that logic makes sense. So.
Yeah, I don't think why it should do that. That doesn't make much sense. It would be nice if it did.
I think that was the expectation, but in a sense, it kind of turned out that it was just a way to like kind of show the biases of the person giving the test in a way.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Person giving the test and also yeah.
I mean, that's the issue with Rorschach is that you have to interpret their interpretation, and then who's to say you're not biased?
Right. It's got out of vogue. I don't think people super administrated it anymore. Although I was administrated the Rorschach test once when I was like a preteen.
Lo, these years ago.
Many moons ago.
I really like this part a lot because that makes sense to me from like computer point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Because let's say if you want to write a program that will look at a picture and tell you whether there's a cat on it or not, right? You would usually do it linearly. That's how people used to program everything.
Yeah.
And it's basically impossible. But you can use neural network that kind of runs in parallel.
Yeah.
And for it, that's a relatively easy task. Telling that a picture is a cat, that's been solved. 99.5%, precision. And the neural network, that's not something you can really teach yourself in words.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You cannot teach yourself exactly how he says, like you're riding a bicycle by being told what it is like. So this is like a very real thing, which is, it's not just true for humans, it's even in the machines we're making.
Yeah.
Same principle.
Yes, exactly. So then the next big chunks of pages is Alan's summary in little good chunks. And so this is worth reading on your own time of just bits and pieces here from like Lao Tzu and I think a couple other people.
I love Lao Tzu.
Give me
Give me that sweet Lao Tzu Taoism.
First summarizing it as the indefinable concrete process of the world, the way of life, and giving some great examples for that. And then eventually talking about how the Taoist no Taoist would dream of asking whether the Tao knows how it produces the universe, for it operates according to spontaneity, not according to plan. Which is a great little summary of a bunch of these chunks of I'm going to call it the revival of spontaneity and the removal of those like Confucian ritual rules that we all kind of live by in society per the social contract. The Tao does not...
I was about to say, I'm reminded of a poem Alan told me once. Asking where the spring flowers grow, the god of spring says, I know not.
The Tao does not know how it produces the universe, just as we do not know how we construct our brains.
Where does my fist go?
Mm-hmm. The Tao is accessible only to the mind, which can practice the simple and subtle art of Wu Wei.
Say it again.
Yeah, that's kind of like, for me, this is where it gets a little bit weird because, like, I've spoken to some people who have studied Taoism, and they seem to be like, oh, it's actually like a collective thing. So they were talking about whether or not you could practice Wu Wei, or if it means anything to practice Wu Wei as an individual person.
Yeah.
And they were like, no, it's a thing that the entire society does as a unity.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I hadn't even considered an entire society of people doing Wu Wei.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's like Confucianism isn't about like the individual people, right? Like,
right. No, that's absolutely.
Yeah, and it's like, I think the idea is that there's a lot of because a lot of this Taoist, like what Lao Tzu or whatever it's called, like the Tao Te Ching,
yeah,
is like, it's written in terms of like a ruler or like society or like politics. It's not written in terms of like a spiritual being or a person.
It could be written in terms of a spiritual leader, but it could also be written in terms of like a general. So like, yeah, there's a lot of interpretation.
Well, also it's like, I don't think that in Chinese philosophy they would draw a distinction between spiritual beings and
that's true,
and politics. Like, it's kind of like, we kind of think of them as like as far apart as you could possibly imagine. Like, politics is like completely the last thing we want to think about when we're thinking about spirituality. But I actually think that they would consider it to be one and the same thing, which kind of makes sense because you want the whole society to like be good.
Right. I mean, that's where the whole mandate of heaven thing comes from. Like, if you're the ruler, it's because you are in line with, the ways of the world, and you have been blessed essentially by the gods. And if you lose, then you've lost the mandate of heaven, and someone else gained it. So, like, it's basically saying you are where you are, but that's okay because you should be there. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm still surprised about the society practicing of Wu Wei because, again, as you said, the Dao De Jing was written for a ruler, and my understanding was like that there's this amazingly enlightened ruler, and thanks to them being so great, the society just works perfect, and everybody else is kind of dumped, and doesn't really get Dao, but they benefit, right?
Yeah, it's not like that. I think that it's like more like everyone at the same time practices Wu Wei.
Where does it come from? Where did you get this knowledge from?
I just spoke to someone in this like server. It's called like Eastern Philosophy, and then they were having like this debate about what does Wu Wei mean. And then I was like, oh, I think it kind of means this, kind of giving like this kind of like the presentation that would be given in like an Alan Watts book, of kind of this like actionless action without intent kind of thing, kind of like what you would think in like present moment, like mindfulness in Buddhism or like in Zen or whatever. And then they were like, no, it is not that. Like, someone who's like a scholar of it, and they were like, it's fully like a societal thing that has to be done by all, or like in a collective way.
I'm disappointed that this is the first I've heard of this, because that sounds fascinating.
Also impossible. How do you practice that?
I mean, you could have a social or cultural backdrop of this, so you can just have everyone be raised in it and be aware of it, and have it.
Like, Taoism's huge in China, right? Like, or it was huge. I don't know how big. I think it's still pretty big now, and
it has
probably
waned a bit, but it's still pretty big.
Yeah, it's like a lot of people are aware of it, and these texts are considered like absolutely classical things. Like, everyone knows about them, and everyone reads them, and like, everyone quotes them. So it's like they have like a lot of like cultural mindshare, and I think that cultural mindshare of having these texts is part of what is like required for them all to practice Wu Wei. So it's like, unless like I think that we were all doing it. Like, I think that it kind of doesn't actually mean anything in a way.
Well, I thought the Wu Wei was basically just if you let the neural network do what it does, that's what you get.
I think that it's different to like
it's different.
kind of like individual, because obviously in Zen Buddhism it is quite individualistic. Like when you when you do it yourself, right? Like just like whatever we call like shikantaza or being or just like enlightened behavior, or I don't know. It's obviously we have loads of different terms for it in Buddhism. This kind of like present moment beingness, which is what I thought that Wu Wei was, but now I'm kind of like. I don't know if it is that, because it's someone, is kind of told me no, it isn't that, and I always have this thing where it's like I read these kind of books and I get an idea of it, and then I'm pretty much always completely wrong. So, and then I'll speak to somebody who actually knows about it, and then I'll just have to kind of defer to their interpretation a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Decades later, we are still being shown by Alan Watts that words don't really mean what we think they do.
Yep.
Yeah.
I just have this feeling that maybe like if you knew the original like language and everything, this would be like perfectly clear and straightforward, and we just confused everything infinitely because
I feel
it's
just a missing cultural context.
Yeah.
Well, also, I mean, it's kind of like one of those things where it's like written. It's kind of like this literal thing that I like to. I don't know. I always get a bit careful about it, because it is written literally as a political text, and it's us that have decided to try and think of it in an individualistic way.
Yeah.
And it's like, why are we doing that? Like, it just is kind of strange. I'm not saying that like a political interpretation is the only one, but before that person told me, I didn't realize the fact that I had looked at it and kind of tried to shove it into an individual context. Whereas on the other side, Zen Buddhist texts are written in a way that it is for an individual practitioner and personal self-realization, even when it's literally written down. Mm-hmm. So I think that's quite interesting. I think in the Taoist text, you'll see the Chinese character for like king thrown around quite a lot and stuff like that. And you do have to think, what is a king?
Yeah.
Is it?
Okay. But think about it this way: in Confucianism, that's not an individual thing, right? This is about how to run a society, right? It wouldn't make sense if you only look at Confucianism through the lens of a single person, right?
Right.
So if
it would make sense to look at it.
It's also a society way.
I think it's the same for Confucianism as well.
My understanding with Confucianism is that it's essentially based on a family model, and the emperor's family is that model. So, you've got the father king, the emperor, whomever, and you've got the mother empress, whomever, and the children, and you've got your family order. So you've got the filial piety, one of the virtues in Confucianism. And so you look at the whole emperor's family and you use that as a model for how you should run your family. And you also use it as a model for the society, where everyone that isn't the emperor is like the children of the emperor and gives him that piety that you would to your father and mother. So it's absolutely not an individual thing, but like it can be applied to how an individual behaves within the context of the whole.
It's very virtue based as well. Like, it's like I've only read, because as part of like, I'm reading this guide for literary Chinese, and the way that you actually learn literary Chinese is you just learn how to read Confucian texts. It's quite interesting actually, like the way they do it. It's not like you read normal stuff. You're just learning the words for like humaneness and things.
Human-heartedness.
Human-heartedness, like heart, mind, and stuff. Humaneness and righteousness seem to be like the pretty much the basis of Confucianism. Or at least that's how they kind of present it. It's based on these two virtues, and obviously that's very different from Taoism, because these are just two labels for things.
Right.
that we try and live up to, whereas in Taoism is much more like suited to the present situation that's arising.
Y'all, we're talking like we've already read the book, and I'm loving it.
I haven't actually read this. I've read some of his Taoism book, which I think he did after this one because he kind of got a bit disillusioned with Buddhism.
Same.
Cool.
Same, Alan. It's fine.
I don't know. It's all really interesting to me. When a man has learned to let his mind alone so that it functions in the integrated and spontaneous way that is natural to it, it begins to show the special kind of virtue or power called te, or day, or whatever.
And what's that?
Well, it's not virtue in the current sense of moral rectitude.
Oh, well, thank God.
But in the older sense of effectiveness and the healing virtues of a plant.
Speaking of the book.
Huh?
Just kidding.
I don't know.
I think it's just like pragmaticness, I guess. Pragmatism, in a way. It just sounds like it's pointing at a virtue like pragmatism.
Superior virtue is not conscious of itself as virtue. So
no.
That's
true.
I would agree with kind of the pragmatic form, right? Like, I'm just being practical, yo. Yeah. Good job. Getting to Tay. The unthinkable ingenuity and creative power of man's spontaneous and natural functioning. I thought that sentence sounded fancy, so I highlighted it. It is like the centipede's skill in using 100 legs at once. Can you imagine? Wild.
Well, if I think about it, it becomes overwhelming. But if I were a centipede and I just did it, it'd just be walking.
So then, Alan,
think about it, it's kind of like martial arts, right? Like if you are a master of martial arts, you are not thinking about it because that's too slow. You are just reacting correctly, instantly.
Oh yeah, because you get attenuated to it. You just do it naturally, and your muscle memory responds for you. You don't have to think at all. That's mastery of most things.
Comes naturally.
This is like muscle memory, but for brain. So
right.
Memory.
I don't know the word for it, but it's
not memory. It's the thing.
Not it's not like formal memory where you think about it though. It's just
intuition.
maybe instinct. I don't know.
I think it's just like intuition, intuitive.
There it is.
Intuition sounds good. Without thinking, you arrive at the correct solution. Just boom.
Mm-hmm.
Like Einstein, man.
Yeah, but more.
More Einstein than Einstein.
Yeah,
well, Einstein was still thinking linearly, right? But this is just happening.
I think that last quote that's highlighted, I don't like that one.
This one?
What is it?
It's just, I don't know. I think that there's not really any evidence for this. Like just from what I've heard of, like from people, that there isn't actually evidence that Zen contains Taoist philosophy, or that there's anything in Zen which is missing from Indian Mahayana Buddhist doctrine. So I think it's kind of like been a bit like, I don't know, like people have stopped trying to push that kind of idea now. But there's definitely a flavor, I think personally, a flavor in Chan or Zen that arises from, obviously there would be, because it's transmitted to a radically new culture. You're going to have this like emphasis on like poetry and like natural imagery, which might be missing from the more intensely spiritual and like colorful Indian traditions.
Right.
But I don't think that in terms of like the actual doctrine of it or like the practice of it, really, that it's got much Taoism.
I feel like in terms of the practice, it has some. I don't know about in terms of the doctrine. I feel like the doctrine's pretty just Buddhist, but like the application, the way of teaching is at least from what I've been told, far less oriented on, reading scriptures and doing all that sort of thing, and far more oriented on direct experiencing. Which
I'm not sure, and the only reason that I think it's because I would say that's true for some forms of Chan Buddhism or Zen, sorry, and then other ones, it's they used to
there's
get
so many different ones.
Yeah, I think Chan's just a Chinese word for Zen, so it's I'll probably just call it Chan to make sure that it's not I know it's not Japanese, but they would get gifted a sutra and then name the monastery after that sutra. That was quite a common way for apparently monasteries. I think they would name it after the sutra, or they would be based around a specific sutra. I think there was a lot of sutra recitation in Chan, just among general schools in China.
Interesting. Yeah, for some reason I've been told that it's far less oriented towards study and knowledge than other schools.
We have an idea of Chan that I think is possibly just based around some Chan lineages and not others, the ones that came through to become more popular. Because obviously Chan was really small until I think the fourth patriarch or something, and then suddenly it just absolutely exploded. And there was a lot of schools, there's this sudden transmission and gradual, or it was sudden awakening, gradual awakening and stuff, and you have all these different parts to it. And I think it's hard to really say anything definite. Maybe you can say definite things about very early Chan,
right.
With Bodhidharma and it was just 10, 20 people total. There's something crazy like that.
At that point, you can kind of pin it down.
Yeah,
but there's so much going on these days. It's not really, you can't say Zen is this at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good job, team.
Thanks, Des. I appreciate your support.
Y'all are so good about talking about things. It's good. That's the end of the chapter.
Oh, well, all right. Dang. We did it.
We did it. Hooray.
I think what I really disliked about it initially is that I didn't have all this context, right?
Mm.
The idea that it's, the other half of Confucianism, sort of, right? Or the idea that this is for the old people who already did all the other stuff, right? And now they can do some Dao, right? So if you take it on its own, I guess that's not very appealing.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I think an issue as well is that it's got that kind of trying to look at just this very cryptic text and trying to construct this kind of idea of what it might have been like. Because if you actually look at Taoism as it's practiced, there's loads of ritual, loads of ancestor worship. There's a lot of magic and stuff, and magic.
Okay, but as with
you don't obviously in Zen we have this kind of these people who've tried to return to the initial tradition kind of thing,
right?
And that's actually carried on. In Dogen, for example, might be said to be someone who wanted to return to how the ancient people practiced, but I don't think that is really a stream that has existed within Taoism.
Taoism has changed a lot since the time of Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi. Yeah, so there's as with Zen, there's a lot of different kinds of Taoism. And religious Taoism, for example, has got a lot of stuff in it that if you take a second, you're I don't remember this ever being mentioned, ever.
Well, it's kind of it's a bit strange for us to come in and be philosophical Taoism and kind of divorce it from that when there isn't a tradition to do so. I think that's kind of a Western impulse to do so.
Okay, so the way I was taught is that there's a distinction, but I can't say that what I was taught was correct. so I'm just going off of what I know. But like, yeah, there are, from what I've heard, certain questionable practices, for example, in religious Taoism that have to do with like trying to harvest life essence from young people or stuff like that. That if you look into it, you start to get a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, I heard like someone dissed like a school of Taoism or something, and then like two witches in the school like gave him cancer.
Right.
And it's just like, I mean, you know, maybe that is part of their tradition, but obviously I think that a lot of people, you want to distance yourself from that, as if you're a Westerner that's like reading about Taoism, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's really hard to do that if you don't have a reference point of an actual practiced school of Taoism or like Taoist temple that
Right.
somehow embodies that. Otherwise, you're just reading this very cryptic text and trying to work it out.
That being said, I love the Tao Te Ching. Just throwing it out there. It's an amazing book, and every time I read it, I get more out of it. But like, it's definitely something you need to take your time with and not jump to assumptions with, because there's a lot going on there, and it's like you were saying, it's very contextually based, and in our society, we lack a lot of that context.
There's this other one as well. I can't remember what it's called. Like, there's like Dao Li Jing, and then there's like I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's this like book of like poems or something, or like stories, but somehow like a Taoist text, and that one's supposed to be really good as well. It's like Chuang Tzu or something.
Zhuangzi.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, that one's supposed to be really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great one. It takes what Lao Tzu did with the Dao De Jing and sort of expands it. Zhuangzi is considered one of the great Taoist masters, but came like 1,000 years after Lao Tzu or something like that. Probably check my facts before I say things, but that's what I feel.
That's what I feel.
I read the book several times, and yeah, I don't know like how to go about it, I guess, because like, it feels like I can sit down and start writing, and I write stuff like the true cauliflower is not a cauliflower, right, or something like that, right, and I'll make it. I can emulate it. See what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You can emulate it to a degree, but if you don't know exactly what it's trying to reference, you're gonna miss the mark just a little bit. But I like, you can make it look almost exactly identical, right? Just by saying things that are, I mean, self-referential,
Yeah, and all these paradoxes, and just
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
So what is the wisdom I'm missing then?
That's part of the key of it, because like the first time I read this book, I was exactly feeling like you were. It's just like, what? This is nothing. Mm-hmm. You're saying things that are like self-evident. Why are you even bothering to write this down? Why am I reading this? Mm-hmm. But I mean, I can only speak from my own perspective. Once I, went into Buddhism a little more and like started to develop in mindfulness and stuff, I came back to it, and it actually started to make sense on a level deeper than what the words just at logical sentences are saying.
Yeah.
Because it's that finger pointing at the moon again. Don't look at the finger. Don't look at the words. That's not what it's saying. But that's one of those things you can't like really teach with words,
Oh, I see. So the words will basically evoke some sort of feeling or understanding.
Yes.
And okay. Yeah, I can see that.
It's got that sort of secondary layer of teaching. It's not the words themselves that are important. It's what they imply,
I think that's kind of true for like every words ever, though, in a way. Like
What
it's
was that?
always trying to everything that's written is trying to evoke some kind of understanding in you. It's just whether or not the
Absolutely.
understanding is a conceptual understanding or whether it's like an intuitive understanding. And I
Mhm.
think that if you try and understand the Tao Te Ching conceptually, it's just gonna be nonsense, or it's just gonna suck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's exactly how I went into it. It's just like, wow, this is weird.
I think it's almost impossible not to go into a piece of writing like that for the first time. You're always going to like try and wrap your head around it, even if it's not appropriate. Even if people tell you not to do it, it's going to happen.
You can't not do it. Like, I mean, at the time I went into this, I was also reading like Marcus Aurelius and, you know, Plato and all this shit, Descartes. So I'm like, oh yeah, okay, it's a philosophical text. I can get into this. And then I read it, and I'm like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah. I have known somebody who like lived it literally. Like they would basically take the little texts and apply them directly to their life, like
That
prescriptively. Do you see what I mean?
that is
Um,
very devoted. I respect that. I don't know
I
how'd
don't
that
think it
go.
worked, but it was an attempt at least, right? Like
Right,
the yeah.
Hmm.
right. Des
All
is
right.
that it?
Yep, that's it. Good job, team.